one of those or both of those in any way you can. And tomorrow the Sounders are playing. So a big weekend of sports here in Seattle. Lots of things to do, even though it's a little bit of a dreary Friday. Still great things to enjoy. So on the show today, I have an amazing guest who has done so much for community. When we speak about shining a spotlight, on people that do things for our community, Senator Claire Wilson from District 30 Federal Way has been a Washington State Senator since 2019. She is chair of the Human Services Committee, vice chair of the LGBTQ Caucus, a member of the Rules Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, and she is the Majority Whip, which I just love that name. I want a picture of her wielding the whip there in front of the state Congress. She is a strong proponent of reform in juvenile justice, child welfare, and correction systems. She also championed the landmark Fair Start for Kids Act. Please welcome to the show, Senator Claire Wilson. Hey there.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So great to see you. And you're doing such great work. A lot of folks in Washington, right? We think that how are we going to protect ourselves? Let's dive right into this from this federal mess that we're in right now. And, we have a lot of great protections in our state for folks, but how will they hold up against this constant pressure from the federal government?
It's a good question. And I know people wake up every day and wonder what happened the night before, because that's when, things seem to happen, not during the day when you would expect it. But as a state, we have protected and will continue to protect as much as we're able to anyone who is within our state or comes within our state, because that's also critically important as people are looking for safe havens and safe spaces, especially as we think about our sisters, brothers, siblings, and our vulnerable populations. But as lawmakers, we've continued to pass legislation that will protect and will continue to protect, whether it's around, reproductive rights, whether it's around gender affirming care, whether it's around protections for marginalized and our vulnerable communities. We have something called Keeping Washington Working, which was really related to immigrant, refugee, and asylee individuals being able to employ and work here, and just and voting safety and workers' rights, and also educational safety for young people so they can be their true selves and their whole selves as they walk through. So, and we also have, an amazing Attorney General, Nick Brown, who has followed in the footsteps of our now Governor Ferguson, really to fight back in court. And that's, for me right now, our biggest concern, because the court has always been the space and the place where we've looked for justice and for just rights. And right now that is even questionable. And if that were to fall away, I think that, that's where my worry is. But I think my colleagues in both the House and the Senate in our state legislature care deeply about protecting and shielding and making sure individuals, whomever they are, have access to resources, supports, and protections.
Yeah, and we so appreciate that. I know that the governor has signed legislation to protect immigrants' information from sharing information from Washington State with the federal government, right? And that's a big step to protect our immigrant population. Is there anything further that you think that can be done to keep ICE from, infiltrating our communities?
Well, and that's a huge concern of mine. I live in the 30th Legislative District. We have the 5th most diverse school district in the nation. And, when individuals are fearful of coming out of their homes or having their children go to school or being in public places that are, those are things I never thought I would see in my own lifetime. And clearly feels like we've gone back in time. Keeping Washington Working was one thing, but again, the issue around ICE is federal. And so there are things we cannot do. But I will say to you that I'm a member of something called the Family Separation Task Force, and it came through an executive order that the governor, as a matter of fact, put out. And the initial piece of it was for all of our state agencies to come together and start to consider what we needed to think about if, in fact, and when, in fact, ICE was coming in and we were finding that families were being disrupted, especially as you think about children and dependency and those things. And the work of that Family Separation Task Force has continued. And there are rapid response teams that have been created that are made up of trusted partners and community organizations, and information that is truthful and information that is in support of families who may be concerned or may run into a situation where they're dealing with detainment of a family member. And so what I would say is there's a couple of resources. One is, if one were to just Google Family Separation Task Force or Department of Children, Youth, and Families, there is a place right there, and it is full of resources in multitudes of languages for individuals. And if you're a trusted partner, or you yourself are wondering about rights as well as responsibility and how it is you protect family in this time, that would be a great place for you to go. And then the Attorney General's office has created a page that is specifically related to making sure people know their rights and they know exactly what to do. And then the other piece for me is, are there some things legislatively we can do? And I know I visit a lot, like indivisible groups and folks that are really concerned. And one of the wonders is legislation related to masking and related to how individuals are dressed, and whether there are things as a state we're able to do if federal folks come in and do not abide by our state law. And so, we're in a place of interim, meaning that we have not gotten together as a caucus or as a body, and that will happen next week for a couple days, and we'll have a better chance of talking a bit and seeing what is it we can do. Because right now, when we're not in session, the executive orders and the things coming from the governor are what is driving and what is making sure that we're responsive as a legislature. That happens in January when we're in session. So hope that answers some of kind of your wonders.
Yes.
And I just have another thing,
Sure.
I just will mention one other thing, and that's around the data sharing, because that is a huge concern. And I will say that there was data that was shared that should not have been shared, and that triggered a great response, as it should have. And that was what came out. The executive order came out after that. But also as a state and as agencies really thinking about what we've traditionally collected as data and why we're collecting it, and should we any longer be collecting that, and how are we shielding and protecting and making sure that anyone who is requesting data has gone through the appropriate channels, so before it's released, that you are very clear and very sure whether in fact that stays within the statutes and the laws of our state. So that work will continue.
Yes, that's an important piece. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You have a long background in education, and for the first time, we really have an administration that is attacking education. I mean, it makes no sense to me, except that they really don't want people to be educated, because then people will more easily go along with their plans and not question, right?
Right.
But how do we as a state fight that when we get part of our educational funding from the federal government?
I believe, I stand strongly in making sure that all children can be educated in our systems, not some or not just a few. And public education is called public education because it is. And it is the one place where we've always gone to learn. And learning means that there are many ways of looking at the world. And I'm just going to be really honest. When I often think, when did adults forget? When we think about what we're hearing. And when people are saying, this is what thou shalt learn, this is what thou shalt not learn, this is what we shall erase, this is what we will put in that never happened before. When we erase entire populations of individuals or the way people walk a world, I say to myself, I remember growing up and thinking my family was like everybody else's family. And I lived in my house and everybody else did what I did. And then I remember, as I'm certain you do, when you went to a friend's house or you went to school or you went somewhere and you realized, oh my gosh, they're different than we are, right?
Yes.
They may look different. They may have grandma living at the house. They may have a different practice, whatever. When did we forget that? And why now do we believe there's only one way of thinking or one way of being? And so for me as a senator, my job is to represent the largest number of people that I can, not just a some and not just a few. And it's not up to me to decide how one walks the world. That's your decision. It's my job to make sure that you see yourself reflected in that. We are taking into account who are the people that live here. And our institutions were built in privilege and were never created to get people out of them. And they're doing a pretty good job of what they're meant to do. But I am really thinking, when we think public education, there's not a better fight to be fought. And and I will continue to do that. I think 1296 is the bill you're talking about around our response to the parental rights initiative. And the 1296 we passed that really protects the rights of students. It also protects teachers and families to make sure that it's a safe, inclusive learning environment. And you will see initiatives out right now trying to once again, shoot that down. And again, this is about public education is for all. And it is the one thing everyone has access to and should continue to anyway.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's not that our government has not in the past whitewashed certain things about our history. I mean, I learned about Black Wall Street as an adult. I never heard about that as a kid in school. Right. And I was shocked when I learned about it. And I felt like a part of our education system betrayed us, not teaching us the truth about some things like that. Right. But this is a different level of an attack, right?
Right. Unlike ever before. And I think in the past we've had, folks that have disagreed, but you've never had the attacks come from the inside out and the outside in. And wanting to dissolve historical systems that have a right and a reason to be there. But what we have to do is kind of do disruption from the inside. And I think that's the other thing when you look at white privilege. I'm just going to call it up and out because I know I walk with privilege but I try to use that every day, not to be a voice for others, but to create that space. When people are fearful of opening the door and providing access and opportunity and voice for others, when you come from that space of not understanding your own journey and how you sit with privilege, then instead of a wealth of resource, you see little resource. And instead of power with, you see power over. And so it's as if you're going to lose something. People are going to take your money away. You no longer will have the power you have. And there is the mindset of it is all about a loss, as opposed to what a tremendous gain if all of us had access to the same generational wealth and all other things. So I'm a disruptor and a bit of a radical, and that's kind of where my focus has been, but I believe for the right reason.
Part of why we're friends. Yes, we align on that very much so. Yes.
Right.
So let's talk about what folks that are listening can do, because a lot of people, it's so overwhelming, right? There's so much, the news is coming so fast, and that's part of their strategy, is that, there's just so much happening so fast that it's hard to know what to do. Right.
Right.
But what can people in Washington State do to help?
For me, it's kind of like I always ask people, where's your passion and your purpose? And where does your passion and your purpose meet? And for some people, it may be focusing on people that are making a difference. For other people, it may be an issue that is causing you to be just fired up, right? So if you find a place where your passion and your purpose meet, and know that there are other people working on other things. So I think that's the other thing when you go to bed at night and are so worried, there is a lot to be worried about.
Yes.
However, there's something about an N. So the more people you can get together, the better off we're going to be. And so I would say, number one, look and figure out where's your passion and your purpose, and you may not know that yet. Second thing is, I would say look for groups, whether you're on Facebook or whether you're in the newspaper or you're walking around and looking at signs, and see who might be out there that is also grassroots like you are, that knows nothing. And I say that you know a lot, but people often feel like they don't know enough to know where to even begin.
Right.
And walk in that door. And I'm going to say indivisible groups are a great place to start. And they're all over. That's where I met Mac before that, but we've recently again met at a Indivisible, and they are grassroots local groups in neighborhoods that don't know what to do either. And people come together, and whether it's around citizenship or civic engagement, whether it's around what's happening with SNAP and food, whether it's around housing and homelessness, whether it's around drug addiction, whatever it is, everyone in that room finds that there are others that have a think like they do. And then together, you kind of figure out what you can do. If you drive down any street in any community on a Sunday afternoon, and October 18th, I think, is the next one that's big and planned, you're going to see people with signs, Medicaid, whatever, signs, and people like you've never seen before. So that's one thing. And then there's other things, like people go down to the detention center in Tacoma or all those kinds of things. You can volunteer. And I think volunteering, again, gives you a sense of doing something when you feel like there's nothing you can do. But then the other thing I would say is you could get engaged in the political process, and that isn't as necessarily as scary as it sounds. But when the session starts and when you start hearing about things, you can testify virtually. You can come to Olympia. You can write comments on things. You can find, again, groups that are advocacy related around issues. And I would also say you can always reach out and say, who do you know that's working on these kinds of issues? I get a lot of those kinds of emails. But look around and read the paper, or look at Instagram, look at Facebook, look at who's posting, and look at who you agree with. And I would also say, remember, the truth always lies somewhere in between. And also think about when you click open an article, oftentimes I know I'm looking on my phone and I realize it's Tennessee or it's Florida, right? And I think that also causes a lot of fear for people because it's coming at us so fast. But all of that that's coming at us is not all local.
Right. That's true.
I mean, it's not all local. And so anyway, probably more than you wanted to know.
No, that's great. I think that's great.
I just think anywhere where you find folk that have a like think, you can feel like there's some hope and that you can make a difference.
Yes, exactly. And you mentioned the articles and we're in a place that I don't remember in my lifetime, and I'm 60, and I don't remember ever it being so difficult to figure out what the truth is, because there's so much fake stuff coming at us. And how do you recommend people sift through what's real?
I would say you've got to figure out who your trusted sources are. And then stick with your trusted sources and question everything. And I would say Google and Facebook are not the place to get your news, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I just think you have to think about, who you're trusted, who you trust.
Yeah.
And I can't tell that to anybody. You've got to kind of look at that yourself. But people, and talk to people and ask people where they get their information and where they get their resources, and make sure there's research or there's data. And then it didn't happen in 1992. Sometimes, again, you read an article and realize what is being cited as 50 years old. That does nothing for what's happening
Right.
today, right? So I
Yeah.
think those kinds of things, and making sure that something is not just what somebody thinks, but it is what we know to be true. But
Right.
I think that's also, I know, a huge thing right now in education, when we're teaching young people,
Mhm.
thinking about how it is that they discern what is accurate data and what
Right.
isn't. And I think, if you're a public library geek, you could also ask librarians,
Oh, yeah.
where is it and who is it that they should be looking toward or looking for? Not a one side or the other, but where does one get accurate information,
Mhm.
and how do we find that now? Because it's a
Yeah.
huge question.
I think it's Denmark. I read that recently that they now are teaching elementary school kids how to be critical thinkers, and
Yes.
I love that. I think
Yeah.
everyone needs that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Very.
one other thing that I want to bring up, because if I asked you if 20 years ago you thought you'd be a senator, what would you tell me?
No way.
And I know this about you, but
20
tell
years,
how you
I'm
went
trying to
from
think.
being in
So 20
education
years
to.
ago was 2006.
Mhm.
And I was working, I wasn't even a school board director at the time. I was working just as an executive director of our state and federally funded pre-K program, and had never, ever considered running for office at all.
And what
Never.
was it that prompted you to do that?
Um, when I ran for school board, somebody called me the night before filing deadline and said, there's only one other person running, and I'm not quite sure that they have what we want or what we need. And would you think about it? And I'm pretty planful, and that was not, I was not able to be planful at the time. And I said yes before I really knew what I was saying yes to. But so I knew nothing about running, because I also was one that never supported people. I always supported issues. Then,
Mhm.
so I just was doing that, and okay, I like that. And then I stopped working when I turned 60 at the agency I'd been working at for 25 years. Was someone who was on the other end of my life, as you are as well. Had a very difficult time trying to find a job.
Mm.
As an older woman, I'll just say it.
Yeah.
And so was offered a job as a field organizer for a campaign, and learned how to knock on doors. I'd never knocked on a door. I'd always voted, but had never done that side of things. And anyway, out of that, I learned about a new program in our state called Emerge, which was just
Mhm.
starting. And their national organization, and their role is to help women and women identified individuals as to become elected officials. So we reached the 51%
Yeah.
representation we should have at every level. And
Nice.
in that application, they asked what I would run for. And the only position, we had flipped the House seats, couldn't run for city council, was already on school board, and Hillary had won by 20 points. And so there was an incumbent in the Senate seat that had been there 20 years, who thought very differently than I, and sits totally separately than you and I on how he walks this world. And so I said that was the seat I was going to run for, and that's what I did. And so was elected in 2018, started in 2019, and you will hopefully see me again for another 4 years. So
That's wonderful. Yes. It's a great story. And I think hopefully that inspires some other folks that, I mean, a lot of people don't start out thinking they want to run for office, but that you can make a difference.
Can I also say, if you're a young person, you can page
Yes.
and learn about that. You can also intern if you're in college. So incredible
Yes.
opportunities I never knew about. Had I known, my life might have been different. But I'm 69, did not know, and so I came to the game late.
Yes. Well, I just want to say again, Senator, thank you for all that you do. Keep up the good work, and we'll be cheering you on.
All right. Thank you, and
Keep
thanks for
making
the
a
opportunity
difference.
to chat.
Okay. All right. All right, everyone. Stay tuned for Seniors Matter.